In the annals of sensational Los Angeles murder cases, few compared to the crime that occurred a little over 90 years ago in a grand mansion at the top of a hill. Exactly what happened would be debated for decades, clouded by wealth, power, and many cover-ups. Greystone Mansion was paid for with oil. Its notoriety endures because of a murder committed within its walls. The estate's original 429 acres, resting at the actual crown of Beverly Hills, were purchased by oil baron Edward Lawrence Doheny as a wedding gift to his only child, Ned, in the late 1920s. The story of Edward Doheny has all the ingredients of a Wild West legend. The son of poor Irish immigrants, the indomitable Edward spent his early adulthood kicking around the rough and tumble mining towns of the West, searching for gold and any other valuable commodity. Initially, Lady Luck didn't seem to be on his side, and by 1892 he was in his late 30s, broke, with a wife in tow, and a sickly daughter who would succumb that same year. It would appear, though, that fate had decided it was time for the proverbial pot of gold to brighten Ed's gloom. That fall he struck black gold, when on a gut feeling he dug his first oil well in the sticky tar fields of Los Angeles. He was further overjoyed when, on November the 6th, 1893, his wife Carrie gave birth to a son, E.L. Doheny Jr., later known to the family as Ned. Ed saw in his son a second chance, a redemption for the early death of his daughter, swearing that he would achieve great wealth to provide a secure life for the boy. Fate continued to go along with his plan. Over the next 2 decades, Doheny would become wealthy beyond his wildest dreams. In addition to virtually controlling the oil markets in California, he would make even more money at Tampico in Mexico, where he drilled some of the most productive oil wells in the world. In Tampico he nurtured many valuable contacts within the Mexican government. Creating wealth meant often being away from his family. Carrie and Ned resided in San Francisco. The couple grew apart and divorced in 1899. Ed had fallen in love with a telephone operator named Estelle Betzold. When their customer-operator chat became over time less business and decidedly more romantic. This proved too much for Carrie, who was always prone to melancholia. They say money cannot buy happiness. Here was a perfect example. Unhappy Carrie ended her troubled life by ingesting battery acid. Ned's father sent for him to come and live with him and his new wife. Estelle greeted the grieving Ned with open arms, and the boy was soon very attached to her. The two became very close, playing games in the big lofty mansion at Chester Place, while Ed was often away, creating even more wealth. Ned was educated at exclusive private Catholic schools, and spent a year at Stanford before graduating from USC. To say he was spoilt would be an understatement, but he was easygoing and had a sense of humor. Top that off with a heart of gold and a handsome face, Ned proved popular with mostly everyone, including his father and stepmother, whom he adored. In 1913, while courting his future wife, Lucy Smith, Ned met a young man named Theodore Hugh Plunkett. Hugh worked at the Smith family's gas station near Chester Place. They soon developed a great friendship, and Hugh ended up acting as chauffeur for the entire Doheny family. Both men went away and served in the Great War. When they returned, Hugh acted as Ned's personal secretary. This involved escorting Ned as he became more involved with his father's businesses. But according to attorney Frederick R. Kellogg, although Hugh acted as secretary to Ned, their relationship was more than that of friends. Another associate, Dr. E.C. Fishbaugh, was more concise. They were like brothers. But while their relationship was described as brotherly, the difference in wealth was always evident. Shortly after their marriage, Ned and Lucy's wedding gift was a mansion adjacent to Daddy Ed's magnificent castle at Chester Place. Meanwhile, brother Hugh and his wife Harriet lived in very modest accommodation. The younger Doheneys were LA's elite darlings. They often splashed onto the front pages of society publications, sometimes pictured sailing on the family yacht Cassiana, or attending a glittering dinner where the dining table glowed with a handsome mound of Richmond roses. Their lifestyle was of enduring excess, bankrolled by the Doheny millions. In 1919, even an automobile Ned purchased for Lucy was worthy of newspaper space. It was described as the classiest creation of the year, custom made by Earl Automobile Works. A silver engraved monogram inlaid in red enamel is mounted on each door. On the panel between the door over the little extra fender, there are specially designed coach lamps. These lamps were designed and constructed by the Tiffany Company in New York City. These lamps give the car a very foreign touch. The car is upholstered in bright long grain red leather, which forms a great contrast with the body and wheels, which are painted Willie's battleship grey with a satin finish. From time to time, a money machine, especially one churning out vast fortunes, needs the cogs and wheels to be lubricated. Thus oiled, the machine will create even more wealth. And so, in November 1921, Ned and Hugh checked into a suite at the Plaza Hotel. On instructions from Doheny Sr., Ned walked into the New York banking house of Blair & Company. He withdrew $100,000 from a joint account he shared with his wife, and stashed the bills in a black leather satchel. He and Hugh then traveled to Washington, D.C., more specifically the Wardman Park Hotel, where they had a luncheon appointment with Albert Fall, who was the Secretary of the Interior for the Harding administration. Ned handed over the leather satchel to Fall, a buddy of his father from the gold mining days. In turn, Fall handed Ned a promissory note. Within a month, Doheny Sr. had replenished Ned and Lucy's account to the amount of $100,000. That single act, carrying that black satchel and handing it over to Secretary Albert Fall, was to seal the fate of both young men in a most terrible way. Ed Doheny was soon awarded the contract for the Elks Hill Naval Petroleum Reserve in Kern County, California. The exchange of money, which Ed would describe as a loan to an old friend, and numerous government officials would instead call a bribe, was part of the infamous Teapot Dome scandal, which involved the leasing of Navy petroleum reserves located at Teapot Dome in Wyoming, and a few in California as well, to private oil companies at unbelievably low prices without any competitive bidders given the chance. Fellow oilman Harry F. St. Clair and Ed were charged with conspiracy to defraud the United States. At a grand jury hearing in D.C. in May, Ned refused to answer questions regarding his role in the delivery, although he testified that neither he nor his father had done anything wrong. Ed was acquitted in December 1926. However, this was not the end of the scandal. He was soon charged again, this time with bribery. In the midst of this political turmoil, work continued on Ned and Lucy's dream home. Begun in 1927, the 55-room mansion included a bowling alley with hidden bar, walls made of leaded glass, a main hall of checkered Carrara marble, a personal switchboard, secret passageways, and grand rooms filled with European antiques. The exquisite grounds included an 80-foot waterfall which could be turned on with a switch, stables, riding trails, a swimming pool, kennel, and the romantic Renaissance-inspired Cypress Lane. This was all designed by landscape architect Paul Thean. according to Theon's main designer Emil Kuhl, the sky was the limit. "I would ask Mr. Theon what the client might want. Give them everything," was the reply. Although Ned's father was footing the bill, it was Hugh who oversaw the construction of Greystone. According to another family retainer, Hugh often signed checks for Mr. Doheny totaling hundreds of thousands of dollars. He was the one who gave the go-ahead for most of the interior decoration of the new mansion, and had carte blanche to meet contractors' bills with checks made out in Ned's name. Towards the close of 1928, with the mansion nearing completion, the normally quiet, sweet-tempered Hugh's mind was starting to unravel. Well, they say he was having trouble with his teeth, which in turn created a dependence on sleeping pills. That and the breakdown of his 11-year marriage. It's patently obvious, though, that the main cause of Hugh's sleepless nights was the Teapot Dome scandal. Neither Ed or his son had any plans on taking the rap. They intended to protect themselves. Hugh Plunkett, however, was a different story. He was involved also, guilt by association. And although Ned had been assured immunity, Hugh had not. That Christmas Eve, Hugh supposedly suffered a complete nervous breakdown and was put in the care of the family doctor, Dr. Ernest Clyde Fishbaugh. By the beginning of 1929, Hugh had become so unhinged that Ned suggested he be institutionalized until his mental health returned to normal. Whether this move was to help their troubled friend or to exempt him as mentally unfit in the upcoming trial will never be known. Unfortunately, Hugh was so broken that he couldn't be convinced to be placed in a sanatorium. Dr. Fishbaugh claimed that Hugh refused all offers of assistance. He simply sat there, almost shaking at times, hands clenched, jaws set at times. He said he would come out of it all right. I could see it was no use to push him further, and so I left. He did not calm down, however, and when Hugh, in his hypersensitive state, realized that Ned was slowly cutting ties with his boyhood friend, the unraveling of Hugh's mind accelerated to the point of no return. According to the official story, on a Saturday night in early February 1929, a very troubled Hugh drove up to Greystone from his apartment in Hollywood. A familiar figure on the property, he was let through by the gatekeeper. During this visit, Ned uttered some impulsive remarks that upset Hugh. Ned and Lucy had planned to go to the theatre that evening, advising Hugh to go home and get some rest. They returned to Greystone some hours later. As they were retiring to bed, Hugh rang. He was at the garage at the gates of Greystone and voiced his intention to come up to the mansion. Lucy implored him not to. A little while later, Hugh let himself into the main house with his skeleton key. Ned found him in the guest room that was reserved for Hugh and sat down to talk with his unbalanced friend. An hour or so passed, and the two men drank alcohol and smoked cigarettes. Lucy was in another part of the house. According to Dr. Fishbaugh, "I received a call at the Hollywood Playhouse from my maid at 10:30 p.m. and was told to go to the Doheny home immediately. Upon my arrival there, one of the watchmen, whose name I do not know, let me in the house. As I entered, Mrs. Doheny was standing in the middle hallway, approximately 8 feet back from the door, and greeted me. She said her husband was in a guest room on the first floor, to the left of the hall, leading from the front entrance. Both Mrs. Doheny and I started down the hall, side by side. A door, which partitions the hall, was slightly ajar, and I saw Plunkett walking towards it. 'You stay out of here,' he shouted at me, and slammed the door shut. I then heard a shot. 'You go back,' I told Mrs. Doheny, and she returned to the living room, which was about 75 feet away from the guest room. I pushed the door open and saw Plunkett lying on his face opposite the door to the bedroom, where I later found Mr. Doheny. Plunkett, to the best of my recollection, was fully clothed. The door to the bedroom was open, and when I looked in I saw Mr. Downey lying on his back, a chair overturned between him and the bed. Both men had been shot in the head and were quite dead. Ned's father was awoken at his home at Chester Place and rushed to the scene. Once there, he refused to heed the advice of family members not to go to Ned's body. "No, I must see Ned," he said with a bowed head as he walked down the hall that leads from the front entrance to the chamber where his son's body lay. "Yes, it is Ned after all. I had hoped against hope there was some mistake." He staggered slightly. He had to pass by the head of his son's murderer, who lay in the hall close to the door of the room. He gazed at his son's body for a moment, and then crouched beside it. He shook with emotion as he reached down and took Ned's hand in his own. "Ned, my Ned," he sobbed as he was half carried from the room. Initially, there was mass coverage of the case in the tabloids, but this died down within 3 days, and after promising a sweeping investigation, District Attorney Burren Fitz proclaimed there would be no inquest and officially closed the investigation, even though many in law enforcement, including forensic investigator Leslie White, doubted the neat closure of murder-suicide. Some things just didn't add up. Dr. Fishbaugh was caught out in several lies, including withholding the fact that Ned had been alive when the doctor burst into the room, breathing although already unconscious. Investigator White also observed that Ned had been shot at very close range. The bullet entered his head, leaving the detritus of gunpowder on his forehead, while it seemed that Hugh had not. He had been found face down, with a cigarette in his hand underneath him, just outside the bedroom door. Ed never got over his son's death. His heart was broken, and 6 years later he followed his son to the grave. Persistent rumours of a love affair between Ned and Hugh was the sensation of the time and lingers to this day. After Ned's death, Lucy Downey and her children continued to live at the house for another 30 years. She tied the knot with investment dealer Leigh Batson in 1932. The ceremony performed in front of the living room fireplace. Despite its horrific beginnings, Greystone became a happy place, filled with opulent parties and children scurrying across the expansive grounds or running down the long carpeted halls. The family had made a happy life for themselves, despite it being a constant reminder of Ned's violent death. Lucy and Leigh were regulars on the social scene. Lucy was also heavily involved with charity work, and her daughter Lucy Estelle, called Dickie Dell, was one of the loveliest and most popular debutantes of the 1930s. After the children grew up and left, Lucy found the giant estate burdensome and too large, and sold it in 1955. The Greystone estate has been owned by the city of Beverly Hills since 1965. Its grounds are open to the public as a park, but its outrageously expensive interior remains, for the most part, sealed behind its solemn walls. 90-odd years after the completion of Greystone, Ed Downey would be the basis for Daniel Day-Lewis's Daniel Plainview character in There Will Be Blood, the film's iconic final scene in which the fabulously wealthy Plainview brutally kills his long-time less fortunate associate before declaring, "I'm finished," was filmed in Greystone's basement. Lucy Smith Downey Batson lived to a very great age, over 100. At the end of her life she moved to a large and luxurious condominium on the Wilshire corridor. After such a traumatic episode within its grand walls, the question begs, is Greystone haunted? Are people who are sensitive to the spirit world able to pick up on the residual psychic energy and replay the fateful scene of 1929? Numerous people have claimed they've seen the ghosts of Ned, Hugh and Lucy roaming the halls. Witnesses have also seen the ghost of a man wearing a black suit and a pork pie hat on Greystone's dramatic main staircase, while others claim to have seen phantom butlers and cooks. It is the spirit of a woman, however, who is most often seen lingering in the lonely halls, accompanied by the unmistakable scent of lilac perfume. Another unusual sight often seen in the mansion is that of a pool of blood. The blood is seen on the floor in the bedroom where the murders took place. It has also been witnessed oozing out of nail holes in the walls. This sight always confounds witnesses because it fades away nearly as soon as it's seen. There have been 237 paranormal experiences documented at Greystone Mansion. Would you stay the night alone? So, my dear friends, who killed who? I just want to highlight some bits of information that I didn't include during the story so as not to unnecessarily lengthen it, but we can discuss it now. After the gunshots were heard and the doctor was called, there was an apparent wait of 2 hours before the police were called. So what went on during those 2 hours? Apparently, relatives of Lucy Doheny were called by someone to the house. They arrived too. This was all before the police were called, and it was later admitted that the bodies had been moved. So they hadn't been in the position they were originally when discovered. They had been moved for some reason. Also determined that, as I mentioned in the story, that Hugh Plunkett was found face down with a cigarette still in his mouth. Normally, you don't really commit suicide when you're having a ciggy. You might wait till you finish the ciggy. It's not impossible, of course, but the other main fact which points to Hugh not being the murderer is that it was discovered that he had been shot from behind at close range. So that leads us to think that it was probably Ned who did the shooting. Why? Why did he do that? Was Hugh about to confess to the police or say something at the trial which would not benefit the two Dohenys, the elder and the junior? Or was Hugh about to go public about their long-standing homosexual affair? It seems to me it can only be one of those two, or maybe both. Who knows? Hugh's marriage had fallen apart. He probably felt that he had nothing to lose. His mind was unraveling. Maybe Ned just couldn't stand the thought of such a scandal, and on the spur of the moment, once he realized that Hugh was on the way out to do what he promised to do, he shot him. I think that's probably the case, and apparently Ned's funeral was not how it normally would be for that family. He wasn't buried in the family plot. He was buried in Forest Lawn in Glendale alone, away from the family plot. Why would his mother do that? Very strange, isn't it? Is that something that she would do in the case of a suicide? She didn't bury him in the Catholic cemetery? You tell me. You tell me. But it does appear that there was a cover-up to help keep the Doheny's name from being tarnished. And so the guilt was placed upon Hugh. And of course, the Dr. Fishbaugh, was that his name? Dr. Fishbaugh? Forgotten already. He was a close friend of the family, so his evidence about Hugh's unraveling mind, was that true even? Was that just made up? Maybe Hugh was quite all right and was just anxious about the upcoming trial and felt that some things needed to be confessed. We'll never know to this day, because the doctor stuck to his story, and that's it, and so did the rest of the family. Well, my dear ones, I'm going to head off now. Have any of you guys started to think about planning your holidays, your summer holidays, if you're in that part of the world where summer is on the way? We haven't at the moment because we don't really know what's happening. I don't know whether we can actually travel at all, which would be very disappointing. We wanted to go to France again, to that old chateau, to meet some friends. I'm not sure whether that's going to happen. I've just heard that France is going into a hard lockdown again. So, it's a bit depressing, isn't it? When you can't sort of have something to look forward to. But, I don't know, we just have to chin up, soldier on, bear it out, until hopefully sometime this whole nightmare disappears and we can go back to normal. I really do hope we can return to normal. I've had enough, and I'm sure most of you feel the same way too. I just wanted to show you this before I go. This will be happening very soon, where YouTube is going to start taxing creators outside of the US. Now bear in mind, I pay tax on my income from YouTube here already in Switzerland. I pay tax on that. I'm fully taxed on that. So now YouTube has decided they're going to try and grab a bit more of the pie and tax what could be possibly up to 30%. And I think it's going to be 30%. I had a bit of a look. I had to sign the agreement. If you don't sign the agreement, then they will tax you for all of your viewership worldwide. So they're only going to tax you for the viewers who watch you on YouTube in the US, and that is 70% of my viewers on YouTube. Most of my viewers are from the US, so they're going to tax me on that. And if you notice on the bottom part of the text there, it says that certain countries will be exempt, Switzerland being one of them, but they seem to have that covered because there is a default copyright tax which you cannot claim exemption for, and that is 30%. So it will be interesting to see once it takes effect. Plus they have this now implemented where they will show ads on any video they want. This is YouTube, of course, even if a creator doesn't have monetization enabled. So it looks like they're scrambling for money. Are they losing big time? Are they losing money, YouTube? Are they going downhill? Makes you wonder, doesn't it? They're just sort of grabbing money instead of sort of taxing the advertisers or getting more money from them. No, it's always the small creators who have to fork out, have to bend over, so to speak. Yeah, so these new rules are now in effect in the US and will apply to users worldwide by the end of 2021. So, yeah, interesting, eh? So even if you don't want ads on your video, if you're totally against ads, if you've decided to have all your videos not monetized, they're going to put ads on them anyway. What they're doing is, of course, they're trying to force you to pay for YouTube Premium where you don't have ads. So they're going down that way. I knew they would as well, where they're going to try and force you to pay a monthly subscription. And that was what I mentioned years ago. If you remember in that video, a couple of years back, I got told by an insider who worked at YouTube, Google, that this was going to happen, and it's slowly being implemented. Things that make you go, Well, my dear friends, I'm going to head off now, and I hope you're having a jolly time, regardless of this situation worldwide, and I'm looking forward to seeing you next time, my dear friends. All the best. God bless. Bye-bye.